Hello, and welcome to the Governor's Youth and Agriculture meeting. This morning, a number of you participated in the NAYI Tri-City event, and now we're being joined by a number of additional FFA members, college students, and past NAYI delegates. We'd like to welcome you all to today's meeting. My name is Morgan Zumpf. I'm a junior at UNL majoring in animal science and agricultural communications, and I'm from Friend, Nebraska.
And I'm Landon Swedberg, and I'm a sophomore at UNL majoring in agriculture economics with a minor in animal science, and I'm from North Platte, Nebraska. Morgan and I serve as the head counselors this year for the Nebraska Agricultural Youth Council, also known as NAYC. Many of you are familiar with the NAYC, but for those of you who are not, the council is comprised of 23 college-aged men and women with a passion for agriculture. We've been chosen by the Nebraska Department of Agriculture to educate the youth about agriculture. Throughout the year, we work to educate the youth about agriculture through elementary classroom visits, our urban youth farm tours, and through the Nebraska Agricultural Youth Institute, or NAYI.
NAYI is a 5-day summer program for current high school juniors and seniors that enables them to learn more about the agricultural industry, how to advocate for the industry, and the careers available to them in agriculture. Many of you in the room attended NAYI last year, and we're pleased to see you here today. We'd also like to encourage those of you who attended our one-day NAYI Tri-City event today to consider attending our full NAYI conference this summer.
What a privilege it is for us to have this personal opportunity with the governor today. We encourage you to take an active role in today's discussion, ask questions, and voice your opinions. You'll be able to use the live Twitter feed and share your questions and thoughts with the governor or the other speakers. To do so, please use the hashtag AskGovRicketts. So AskGovRicketts. This is a wonderful opportunity for all of our friends that are tuning in via the web, streaming, to interact with the governor as well. So let us know what questions you have, and again, the hashtag is AskGovRicketts.
With that, it's my privilege to welcome Governor Pete Ricketts to the stage to open our discussion. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you very much, Morgan. Thank you very much, Morgan. Well, I'm actually going to come down there and talk too, because I'd prefer to be down there to give my opening remarks. Morgan, Landon, thank you very much for the kind introductions, and thank you all for being here today. I know we've got some NAYI folks, we've got FFA folks, we've got some college students, we've got people from all across the state. So thank you all for being here today. It is a pleasure to be here for the 28th Annual Governor's Conference on Agriculture. And the mission here is very important, and it's twofold. The first is about feeding the world. By 2050, there will be 2 billion more people on the face of the earth. And because of rising standards of living, we'll have to produce 100% more food. Think about that, we're going to have to double the food supply. 70% of that will have to come from productivity and innovation. And of course, we're ideally situated right here in Nebraska to be able to take advantage of that, because we've got the world's most productive farmers and ranchers right here. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why we have this Governor's Ag Conference, is to pull those producers from all across the state together to talk about trends, consumer interests, sustainability, and trade, and frankly, where's the industry going? And how can we meet that need? I can't think of a more important mission than feeding the world. Now, there's another mission that goes along with this as well, and that's growing Nebraska, creating more and better paying jobs to keep folks just like you here in our state, and to attract people like you from around the country to come here and make Nebraska their home. You see, agriculture represents about 25% of our state's economy. If we're going to grow our state, we have to grow agriculture. And again, that's one of the other reasons why we have this conference, and we have been for the last 28 years, to make sure that producers have the opportunity to come together to share those best practices, to network about how we best go about doing that job of growing our state, growing agriculture. And what I thought I'd do here today is just talk about some of the things we've got going on in the legislature right now. And then we've also got a panel up here to talk about how they got into agriculture. But at the end of the day, there's one thing I want to make sure that you take away and remember from this. That whether you decide to pursue education here in Nebraska or go out of state or ultimately get a job out of state, we want you back here in Nebraska. We have the best place in the world to live right here. And we have got tremendous opportunities, especially if you want to pursue a career in agriculture, right here in Nebraska. The way the industry is changing, there's going to be so many opportunities. And we want you, our single greatest resource, our people, to find those careers right here in Nebraska and help us grow. And so as I think about what am I focused on right now in this current session, it's about how do we accomplish that? How do we help facilitate growing Nebraska? So I'm focused on a couple of key issues to make that happen that relate specifically to agriculture. The first, in general, is tax relief, but in specific, property tax relief. As I've traveled the state for the last 2.5 years, it's the number one issue people talk to me about. And it's, in particular, it's impacted agriculture. If you look over the last 5 years, taxes paid on ag land, okay, this is not valuations going up, this is actually taxes paid, the dollars that people have had to write checks for, have gone up 66% in the last 5 years versus 8% for commercial and residential real estate. That's a huge increase, and especially if you think about it, if you're a farmer and your top 3 inputs are seed, fertilizer, and property taxes, that's putting a big squeeze on your operation. Again, that's our biggest industry. So I've been working with Senator Glore, who is chairman of the Revenue Committee, and Senator Sullivan, who is chairwoman of the Education Committee, on 2 different bills to address how we get property tax relief. And the key to any sort of tax relief is controlling costs, controlling your spending. Last year we did this at the state government level. We cut our growth of government nearly in half, from 6.5% growth in the last budget to 3.5% growth in this current budget. And because we did that, we were able to increase the property tax credit relief fund up by 45%, delivering in this budget $408 million of direct dollar-for-dollar property tax relief. And now we're working on structural changes through those 2 bills I just talked about to be able to deliver further property tax relief in the form of controlling spending. Another big initiative I have is how we continue to grow our largest industries. I mentioned agriculture already, but manufacturing is number 2 and tourism is number 3. All 3 of those require a strong roads infrastructure. And so I'm working with Senator Jim Smith, who's chair of the Transportation Committee, on the Transportation Innovation Act, which would create an infrastructure bank, would allow us to accelerate the work on our expressway system. Again, helping to spur economic growth by making sure we've got that 21st century roads infrastructure so that our key industries can expand. We've got a lot of other bills that are going to be coming up, and in fact, one that may be of interest to you is the right to farm. This is a constitutional amendment that was proposed by Senator John Keene of Hartwell. And it actually just got out of committee today, so it will be discussed on the floor of the legislature. As a constitutional amendment, it's not something I sign, but if it were to pass, it would go on the ballot this fall. And the whole point of right to farm is to actually protect our producers here in the state from outside groups like HSUS, who would want to come in and pass regulations that would be detrimental to our industry here in agriculture. For those of you who may not be familiar with HSUS, or HSUS, Humane Society of the United States, they have an agenda to end agriculture as we know it, specifically animal agriculture. They don't believe that any animal should be killed for food. They want to make us all vegetarians, better yet, vegans. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. In fact, that is quite well documented on the record that even though it's not an official part of their policy, key members, leaders in their organization have said exactly that. And we should take them seriously at their word. They are not our friends. And in fact, in other states, they've already done this. They've passed regulation, for example, in California, that limited the size, regulations had to do with the size of chicken cages, for example, that has devastated the poultry industry in California. The number of egg-laying hens in California is down 23%, and consumer prices are up 35%. And they've tried this in other states as well. And before you say, well, that could never happen in Nebraska, in 2008, Diana Shimmick, one of our state senators from Lincoln, proposed a bill at the request of HSUS with regard to the crates for hog gestation. So it can happen here, and the right to farm would be a way that we could pass on our, change our Constitution, passing through the ballot initiative, a way to protect ourselves against that sort of outside force coming in to create regulations. And in particular, this would benefit our smaller producers who may not have the resources to fight somebody like an HSUS. I could also see a future where somebody comes in with anti-GMO legislation. So again, this is something, this right to farm is something that would, in particular, benefit all of you who are planning on going to agriculture down the road to protect us against outside groups coming in and regulating our largest industry here in the state. So as you can see, there's a lot of things that we have going on in the legislature right now that are going to impact how we're able to grow Nebraska and how we're going to be able to continue to have a strong ag economy here in our state. So thank you very much for being here to be able to have a conversation about some of these issues. We'll get into a question and answer in just a moment. What I want to do now is introduce our panelists. We're going to just talk a little bit about their background history, how they got into agriculture. And then what we'll do is we'll open it up to questions and answers. And again, as Morgan and Landon said, you can tweet in questions if you're doing the live web stream or if you're sitting here in the audience. But let me just introduce the folks we have up in the panel here, and then I'll ask you to one by one come up and talk a little bit about yourself. We've got Greg Ibaugh, who is our director for the Department of Agriculture here in Nebraska. Again, obviously an agency here in our state that focuses specifically on the areas of what we're doing in agriculture to be able to grow that industry here in our state, and also gets involved in other aspects of regulation to make sure we've got a safe food supply. We've got Aaron Cavan, who is, Cavan, sorry, Aaron Cavan. I knew one of these words I was going to get wrong, right? Behringer Ingelheim, right?
Correct.
And then it was also Vetmedica.
Correct, if you want to go all the way.
I'm going all the way. Vetmedica.
Yep.
Okay, so, and you are the account manager for the swine unit, right?
Correct.
And so you're going to talk a little bit about how you got into agriculture.
Yep.
And then Courtney Dentlinger, who is on the end, is our director of economic development. In fact, she's only been on board less than 2 months. She originally comes to us from Norfolk, where she was doing economic development up there as well. And so she'll also talk about her involvement with agriculture and growing the state. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Greg, and have you start making some remarks about your background.
Okay, a lot of you already heard from me this morning, so I have a little bit of philosophy on why you're here and what we were hoping that you would learn from being part of the speakers and the interaction with industry, people that have jobs in agriculture and in related fields. So hopefully you've had some exposure to that. This is a great opportunity for you to learn a little bit more. Unlike a lot of you in this room, I was born into a farming family. I grew up on a farm. I did all the things that rural kids do with being in 4-H and being involved in helping out on the farm, and went to college. And after college, I worked for a bank for a little while, and realized that farming is really what I really enjoyed. And at that point in time, went back to the family farm and began farming on my own. But I also understood that there were a lot of things that impacted what I did on the farm that were out of my control unless I became involved in some of the discussions. So I joined organizations that represented the commodities that I grew, like the Beef Council and Farm Bureau, and became involved in those. And over time, had the opportunity about 18 years ago to become involved with state government and have the opportunity to work with issues and governors and legislators and other agency directors on those issues. And so, which has given me the opportunity now to look at the agricultural industry in Nebraska and see that it's really bigger and really more involved than farmers and ranchers. It involves people in every town in our state that have jobs that maybe they don't even realize themselves directly influence the success of agriculture in our state. And I've realized through those discussions that not only are there jobs out there everywhere that impact agriculture, but companies are telling me that they're having trouble finding employees for those jobs. And so just like I talked this morning, that those include welders, they include people that manage data, they include people that are scientists that analyze soil samples. There are a lot of different career avenues that are in every major and in any university, and they're also in almost every technical education track. There are jobs that impact agriculture, and so that's part of the reason why we're reaching out to students across our state, especially in areas that aren't traditionally schools that might think about careers in agriculture, trying to encourage students to think about the opportunities that we have available. So, Aaron, your turn.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Governor, for the introduction. I guess before I get started, who in here has all been at NAYI? Awesome. All right, as the governor said, my name is Aaron Kavan. I am currently live in rural York County, Nebraska. I am a strategic or key account manager for Boehringer Ingelheim Vetmedica. We are the world's largest swine manufacturer, but we also not only do swine vaccines, we also are involved in cattle, and then we also are the largest in feline or canine, and then also we do a bunch in equine. A lot of people haven't heard of us. We are family owned by currently living Christian Boehringer out of Ingelheim, Germany. But yet globally we do have 42,000 employees, and our animal health is all based here out of the U.S. out of St. Joe, Missouri, and roughly have about 1,200 of us that run across the country doing similar to what I do, but we also have a huge R&D section based out of Ames and then scattered throughout the Midwest as well. On a day-to-day basis, I work with 5 accounts that are in the pork powerhouse, all of them in the top 10. Spend most of my time in Iowa. These are guys that are raising hogs. My smallest one that I work with personally raises a little over 2 million finishing pigs a year. The rest of them have goals of producing over 1 billion pounds of pork in one fiscal year. Kind of how I got started. I did not, what I would say, born into a traditional family farm. I was born onto a small acreage outside of Wahoo, Nebraska. Was involved in 4-H, showed sheep, showed some pigs, dabbled in a little bit of everything. But from there, kind of moved on, went to college at Lincoln, the University of Nebraska, got an animal science degree. I would highly recommend all of you here, if you have a chance, any of our technical colleges, the University of Nebraska, there's really no reason to leave the state. We have everything here we need in terms of your education on a higher level, but also at the high school level as well. From there, actually was going to go to law school, had my LSAT and everything done, but had an opportunity to go work for another animal health company, Elanco Animal Health. Did that instead, went and lived in southern Minnesota, worked for them for a couple years. But as soon as I had a chance to move back to Nebraska, I did. I've been here the last 8 years. Not only do I do my full-time position with BI, but I'm also involved in a couple other family operations. My father and I have created a hog feeding LLC that we have that's scattered throughout the eastern half of the state. My brother and I also are involved, crazy as it sounds. We feed a bunch of goats, and that has continued to grow. And then I cash in most of my vacation time to help out my in-laws and that side of the family. Have a very nice family farming operation south of York, which I've always enjoyed spending time with. I'd like to recommend all you guys, no matter what you're doing, NAYI, whether you don't know if you're going to go into ag, attend it. It'll open your eyes up to the opportunities that are available. And as Greg and the governor have both touched upon already, it's not strictly the production agriculture that you're used to. It far reaches that into IT, engineers, doctors for the communities, electricians, plumbers, whatever it may be. There's tons of opportunities that are touched by agriculture, and we need to continue to keep that grassroots and everybody know that, because that's what our state depends upon, but not only our state, but the entire Midwest. Also, to help you guys understand, when they mention the globalization and our world becoming smaller and smaller, and living in Nebraska here, we are in the epicenter of world food production. I actually spent this last week at a meeting in Louisiana where I was with a bunch of veterinarians, and I was with vets from Venezuela, Spain, Mexico, South Korea, Japan, and Malaysia. I myself have actually had opportunities to move to many of them countries, but me and my family, we're going to stay in our roots here in Nebraska. So just to let you guys know, I mean, the opportunities, even though you might be based here in Nebraska, they are globally reaching. And as we get going, if you guys got any questions about that as we go, please let me know.
Good afternoon. I'm Courtney Dentlinger. As the governor mentioned, I am his director for the Department of Economic Development. Many of you might think economic development and wonder how ag plays into that, but as you heard the governor mention, in our state's economy, 25% of our state economy is driven by ag. Department of Economic Development has 100 plus projects that we work on a year. Right now, we have 22 projects that, depending on how broadly you define ag-related, are related to agriculture. Whether those projects are food processing, utilizing our inputs, or bioscience companies that are utilizing our commodities, or equipment manufacturers who are making the equipment that we use on our farms. So much of it is tied back to ag. I grew up in Norfolk, Nebraska, in the northeast corner of the state, working on a family farm. Had the opportunity to be involved in all aspects of the operation. We raised corn and soybeans and cattle. My father really believed in experiential learning and in free labor. I didn't have an intentional path to utilize my background in ag. I went off in a different direction, but I was surprised at how many junctures that experience helped me. I went off to study law in Washington, D.C. after I graduated from college here in Nebraska. I studied international trade. My background and the knowledge that I had with commodity sales globally helped me in those classes and in a subsequent internship with the International Trade Commission. When I came back to the state of Nebraska to practice law, I was again amazed at how often my experience back on the family farm assisted me in the practice. I had cases from personal injury lawsuits to overturned pivots to damaged crops. And in each one of those instances, I was able to pull on my experience in agriculture to be successful. But I want to focus my comments this afternoon on my most exciting role to date, and that's serving the governor as Economic Development Director of this great state. We have so much opportunity to grow the state of Nebraska. And as you heard, with the amount of food that the world is going to need over the coming decades, we're well positioned to continue to grow our state, specifically with respect to ag. As I mentioned, we've got a number of people in the department who are working very closely with a number of companies located here domestically, and as you heard earlier from Aaron, globally, who have an interest in coming to the state of Nebraska and operating right here. I believe one of the best ways that we can position ourselves is to diversify our ag economy, to build upon our strengths. If we have years where commodity prices are high, that's wonderful. If we have years where commodity prices are low, let's utilize that opportunity to recruit in companies who can use those commodities, bring in additional jobs to the state economy, and who can help us build those commodity prices back up. I'm very excited to see so many of you here today, so many of you who are excited about agriculture and a future in ag. Show of hands, how many of you would like to come back to the state of Nebraska or stay in the state of Nebraska? once you've completed your education. That's fantastic. There are so many opportunities here. And I don't think we do a good enough job of explaining those opportunities to all of you, to letting you know just what you can do to make an impact in the state of Nebraska. One of the things I'm most excited about in this role is the ability to build up our communities across the state. We see some communities in the rural areas who are in a period of decline. This is really our chance to build those communities back up, and I hope that each and every one of you will play a role in that, in building up our state, in building back up our communities, in building up our workforce. We have thousands of wonderful open positions right now in the state of Nebraska, just waiting for you. Thank you so much for your interest in agriculture, and I'm very excited to see that so many of you want to stay in the state of Nebraska.
All right, well, thank you very much, everybody, for laying out for us how you got involved in agriculture and what your thoughts are. So now we're into the question and answer part that we warned you about at the beginning. So this is where you get a chance to ask one of the panelists about agriculture, what their thoughts are, their career, anything about it. When you have, if you have an interest in saying, gee, how could I get to be the future director of economic development or the future director of agriculture or an account manager at a fancy animal science company. So let's take some questions. First one's always the hardest. Oh, we got one back here.
I had a question I wrote down so I didn't stumble. For anyone up there, but what are some things that Nebraska's doing to market Nebraska ag products at foreign markets?
Sure. So one of the things, and Director Iba, I'll let you also talk on this topic too. One of the things that was a goal of mine is to do 2 trade missions a year or reverse trade missions a year. So last year we actually made 3 if you count the state of New York as a foreign trade mission. In April, we went to New York, Director Iba and I, with a delegation of Nebraska ranchers to meet with writers and reporters talking about how beef is grown in Nebraska and why we've got the best beef in the world right here in our state. And talking about, again, how our ranchers and our farmers were the original conservationists because they wanted to pass along that family rancher farm on to the next generation. And that was a message that really resonated in New York, where people, again, don't necessarily know where food comes from. And so that was one area where we actually went to 3 different restaurants that promoted Nebraska beef and a butcher shop that promotes Nebraska beef to really try and highlight that and get the word out there. We also went to Europe with, again, a delegation of farmers and ranchers, and went to Italy, went to a food expo show there and promoted the state of Nebraska. Then also went to Brussels, which is the capital of the European Union, to talk with EU officials about some of the non-tariff trade barriers. And then finally ended up in Denmark talking with a company called Novozyme, which has a facility in Blair, about their opportunities to expand, and then again just promoting the state of Nebraska and Denmark. Denmark is actually a country that really believes in free trade, so that was a great market for us. We're looking again this year to do something similar with regard to that. We're going to be doing a sort of reverse trade mission in D.C. We were one of 8 states selected to market ourselves to investors from all around the world. And then we'll be setting up a trade mission in the fall, which I think the current thinking is Asia right now. Is that right, Greg? So why don't, obviously we haven't made that announcement yet, and that's not firm. But Greg, why don't I let you comment about what you see as some of the benefits from trade missions?
Well, we're doing just a lot of things. The governor touched on 3 things that he did that he considers to be trade missions, but he actually has done a lot more because he's signed my travel request forms to send me all over the world at different times, and so that's really an extension of the governor and working to sell our state and the commodities that we raise. But I think that
mention some of the places you've been just in the last few months.
So I have been to South America, where we promote our genetics. We sell the great livestock that our producers develop genetically here, in the form of semen and embryos to countries around the world, but South America is an area that is especially interested in that product that our producers, because America is recognized and Nebraska within America is recognized as being kind of the key, the best place to go to get the greatest beef genetics. I've been to Africa last fall with the USDA Deputy Secretary to look at the opportunities there are in Africa. And those probably aren't direct export activities or opportunities right now, because I think there's a lot more opportunities for our agribusinesses right now to look at the emerging technological growth that's going to happen in Africa. They're trying to figure out how to do some basic improvements in their agriculture, which could include irrigation, which Nebraska is an expert on. I've spent time in Asia promoting all kinds of commodities, from distillers grains, which are byproducts from our ethanol industry, to finished to corn that they feed to their livestock industries in Asia, to finished products like beef and pork. And so there's some great opportunities there. And then we continue to be very interested in the European market, because Europe has put itself in a position through regulation and public opinion that they've really limited their agriculture's ability to produce food. And so Europe currently, 10 years ago or even 15 years ago, Europe was a major competitor for us as we approached export markets. Today, Europe is a net importer of food. So Europe represents some great opportunities for us to export food, and Europeans in general purchase high-end food. And so there's a lot of value that we can add to food here in Nebraska and market it as a finished product in Europe. And so those are definitely some great things we're doing. We also host, members of my staff at the Department of Agriculture, and I know members of Courtney's staff, host visitors from around the world. Probably every week we have somebody in one of our departments from a different country in the world that's looking at Nebraska, either from an investment point of view or to purchase a good or a product that we manufacture or grow here in Nebraska. Do you want to add anything?
All right, so that should have given, those long-winded answers should have given somebody a chance to come up with a new question.
Yes. We have a question off of the Twitter feed. The question is, Governor Ricketts, you weren't originally active in ag. What brought you to be passionate about agriculture?
So yeah, my family did not grow up in agriculture. Well, I should take a step back. My grandfather actually was a farmer, and so I remember as a kid going to his farm. But my dad wasn't in agriculture, and I didn't have a career that started out in agriculture. The reason I'm so passionate about agriculture is because this is what we do in Nebraska. This is the heart and soul of what drives our economy. 1 out of 4 jobs in our state are related back to agriculture. And so it really is a no-brainer that if we're going to grow our state, we have to grow agriculture, and that's why I'm so passionate about it. We have to grow our state's largest industry, and that's why we need young people like you to look at the jobs that we have available all across the state. I don't have the stats off the top of my head, Greg. Do you know, there's some stat out there about how many jobs just in agriculture that are open right now? But it's in the tens of thousands, and I can tell you right now in our state, just on our Nebraska Works website, we've got this is a place where you can put your resume up. We've got about 10,000 resumes. We've got 50,000 jobs listed there. Do you remember what the stat is for agriculture, Greg?
It's a stat that's related to a 4-year degree, but there are roughly, and USDA has done the research in association with Purdue University, that each year there are 50,000 or 55,000 jobs in agriculture for students with 4-year degrees. And people coming out of a university with an actual agriculture degree are only about 35,000. So there's that big 20,000 student gap. You know, those jobs are filled, some of them by people with a biology major, a chemistry major, or a math major, statistics major. But if they, but they're the second choice. People that if they would have studied agricultural statistics or bioscience or something like that, they would have been the first considered. And so people that have that direct ag experience or have studied agriculture actually have a leg up on those jobs.
So again, we need to fill those jobs if we're going to be able to help grow our state, because I think, and it was alluded to as well, we want to look at ways that we can create value-added agriculture and, you know, really grow the foundation of what we have with regard to our commodities here in the state to be able to create, you know, lots more jobs. So that's how we're going to grow our state. Got a question there in the back.
My name is Trent Mastey. I'm a senior at UNL, and my question is based on the funding of public schools. So in the future, plan on raising a family in a rural community. So what does the future of funding for public schools look like?
Well, if you look at what's happened in funding schools across, just in general, over the last 15 years, the funding of schools in the state has been very strong. It's grown at 6.39% over the last 15 years on an annual basis, at a time when our student population is only growing 0.32%. So essentially, spending on schools has grown 20 times what the rate of student growth is. So the state has been committed to supporting our public schools through our school aid formula. And again, one of the things that we're looking at right now is how do we get property tax relief. As I mentioned, that was one of the things we kicked off with. And looking at some of those, you know, again, if you're looking at how we're going to do that, it's going to be through looking at controlling spending. And then we have to look at how we're going to do that with regard to both at a city and county level as well as a school level. And that's where we got to find that balance between how are we continuing to fund schools to make sure we continue to have a great education system here, and also being respectful to the taxpayer who has to foot that burden. One of the issues we've seen, as I mentioned, you know, ag land or taxes on ag land have gone up dramatically. That's in large part because valuations on ag land have gone up dramatically. You know, when corn goes up to $8 a bushel, you're going to see more demand for ag land. People are going to buy it. Well, that's driven up the price of ag land. What that meant in our school aid formula is that it looked like those rural school districts had more resources, so they lost a lot of rural school districts lost equalization money from the state, and those shifted to more urban areas. So we need to take a look at all of our funding mechanisms, especially we're going to have to go back and look at the TIOSA formula, because it never anticipated ag land valuations going up so quickly, so much. And that's what's led to a lot of the equalization money being shifted to urban districts. And we've got some ideas on how that would balance back out. For instance, a part of my property tax proposal is to limit the growth of ag land valuations to 3% a year on average across the state. And essentially what that means is there'd be a factor calculated on everybody's ag land that would reduce the amount of taxes paid on it on an annual basis, so that on average across the state, that would only be 3%, the valuation rather, would only be 3%, not the taxes paid, the valuation. So that's one of the ideas that would eventually balance that back out over time. There's other ideas that are out there in the legislature right now, and that's part of what the discussion we're having right now in our legislature is, can we get one of these ideas out of committee to the floor for debate and get it to my desk? I don't know if, Aaron, you want to?
And I'll actually follow up. I have a beautiful wife, and then I have 6 kids, or a 6-year-old daughter.
6 kids? You got some plans there, Aaron?
I got a 6-year-old daughter, 2-year-old boy, and then we have a new one on the way that'll be born here in April. And living in rural communities, we have awesome schools that are available to us. And so it's not really a concern. I realize over time that there'll probably be some consolidation, especially in some of our more rural areas. But in terms of quality of education, there's nothing there that should be a fear when it comes back to living in rural America. I full-heartedly believe that, and that's where we're raising our family, and very happy with it.
Oh, we got a question over here, it looks like. Yep.
You've mentioned commodities a lot, and you just mentioned $8 corn. Well, as you may know, corn and cattle are not very high. What do you think what do you think the state can do to get those prices back up?
Well, again, a lot of those prices, so again, I mentioned $8 corn, and now it's less than $3.50. Cattle prices are down 17% year over year. Hog prices are down 16% year over year. So certainly we are in a cycle right now that's trending downward with regard to commodity prices. And that, is a function of the market that happens, periodically. We have upswings and we have downswings. What we need to focus on in the state is a couple things. One, we mentioned about the international trade, and that was kind of our first question. 96% of the world's consumers lie outside our borders. We have to go out there and get them. And that's one of the ways we can create demand for our products. So we definitely want to continue to push how we can open up markets overseas. For example, China right now is closed to our beef markets. Israel just opened up to it. So we want to make sure we open up those markets, create more demand. When you have more demand, obviously, prices go up, assuming your supply stayed the same. So that's one of the things we can do is create more demand around the world for our products, and why, again, we really want to market ourselves as the premier place for these types of things. Why we went to New York and said, hey, we got the best beef in the world right here in Nebraska. Because we want to get people saying, I want Nebraska beef, not just U.S. beef. So that's one of the things we can do with regard to that. Also looking at what can we do with regard to value-added agriculture. Now, actually, livestock is one of the channels of value-added agriculture. So the more we can expand upon that, the more we can do. In fact, one of the bills we just passed in the legislature was LB 176, which would remove some of the restrictions on hog ownership that had existed in the past, so that now that companies would be able to contract with smaller producers, maybe help somebody like yourself be able to get into the industry if you didn't have that capital base to get into in the first place, and have a chance to build up some of that capital. Ethanol is another great example of value-added agriculture. Here is something that helps us have a clean environment, it helps us be less dependent on foreign oil, and is something that is great here in Nebraska and really helps us be competitive with regard to corn and cattle, having that what's been called as a golden triangle between corn, cattle, and ethanol. So value-added opportunities like that will also help create demand and be able to raise commodity prices over the long term. And that's where, again, where we get involved is working with the EPA on the renewable fuel standard, for example. When the EPA was really going to slash that by billions of gallons, we got organized, contacted the EPA. They ultimately did not bring that RFS back to where we wanted it, but they did bring it up. And so that was a positive step that only would have happened because you had governors and states getting involved with the EPA and as far as consumer groups and ag groups getting in to put pressure on the EPA to bring that renewable fuel standard back up. So there's not going to be a silver bullet. Cycles will go up and down. But one of the things we want to do is make sure we're positioning ourselves for the long term and making sure we've got a great foundation here in our state to be able to take advantage when we do see upswings in commodity prices, to be able to make sure that we're opening up markets overseas and that we're continuing looking for ways to add value to the agriculture here in our state so that we can basically grow our economy. Greg, do you want to add anything to that?
I think, I'm going to be at risk of repeating almost everything he said if I go too long, but I think maybe just a couple things. I think, diversification in agriculture has been a great strength for Nebraska, for our economy. It's not normal that corn and cattle or livestock and grains are down at the same time. And even though grains are down drastically, livestock maybe comparatively aren't down at the same level. So I think diversification for our state is a great thing. But I think at the same time we've maintained that diversity in our state, our farms and ranches have specialized. And maybe it's time for an opportunity for this to be a signal to us that maybe we should look back at our farms and ranches and have them think about being diversified again. And that's why having opportunities for a row crop farmer to add livestock to his operation helps provide some of that market cushion. And so that's something we're working on. And then I definitely think that it gives us an opportunity to get away from thinking about selling corn and soybeans outside of Nebraska and having corn and soybean exports be a priority for us. What we should have is looking for ways to take corn and soybeans and either turn them into meat, or maybe, like Scott had on his slides at lunchtime, he talked about all the industrial uses looking into the future that we're going to be able to do. We're going to replace petroleum-based products with agricultural-based products, and we need to find the way for Nebraska to be a big player in that. And then we take our basis, which now we take a dock to the Chicago Board of Trade to sell our corn and soybeans locally. We'll get in a position where there's a premium attached to them because we're adding value to them right here in our state.
One other thing is a younger producer that you also got to be able to, as they mentioned, diversify. It also gives another opportunity for your family operation is whether like me, I do have a full-time job, but I also am diversified into production agriculture as well. So it's that opportunity if you are back at the family farm farming, and yes, commodity prices at this time aren't that great, that's the opportunity to look to IT, whether it be working with drones or ag guidance, prescriptions, scouting, pick up that seed dealership or chemical dealership that you possibly could do to bring in some of that extra income. There's a lot of opportunities out there, and honestly, a lot of the opportunities that are available now, there's going to be a lot more as we go down the road, many of which that exist today may not exist 10, 20 years down the road. They'll be completely new ones. So you got to be able to keep your minds open and find those new opportunities. But also to give a push for NAYI as well. You guys attending NAYI, this is where you'll meet many of your friends that you'll come. As me, I got probably 20 of them that I contact on a monthly basis that I met at NAYI, from my risk managers. A couple of them are doctors. One ended up being my wife. So there's lots of opportunities and people to stay and connect. So that's just a push for NAYI as well, that there'll be people that you'll meet there that be lifelong friends that'll help you diversify and maintain that solid growth in the ag industry as you continue down the road.
I'd just underscore again, the diversification piece of this is key, and part of that is outside of really what we consider the ag economy and goes into those businesses that are utilizing commodities, and that will in turn increase demand. Had an opportunity recently to tour a business right here in the state of Nebraska, located on the Cargill campus in Blair, NatureWorks, and they create plastics out of corn and fabric out of corn. It's really an amazing operation, and that's yet another market then for one of our commodities, which increases demand.
Well, you also maybe talk about the poultry industry a little bit with Hendricks?
Yeah, we have an opportunity now in the state of Nebraska for a number of reasons. We are situated very well for the poultry industry. Some other states have biosecurity concerns, and so we've been working in partnership with the Department of Ag to recruit in industry related to poultry, including Hendricks, which has announced that they're going to be opening up a facility in Grand Island. But there are many opportunities here because of lack of biosecurity concerns in the state of Nebraska, and because of our access to water and our central location. So we're continuing to diversify even within agriculture away from some of the more traditional Nebraska commodities.
And then I'll just compliment you, Greg, on the steps you had put in place prior to some of the, avian flu epidemics that happened in the poultry industry, that Nebraska was prepared for it and had the proper steps that really gave some of these folks confidence that we'd be able to handle such emergencies in the future. So kudos to you, Greg, for having that ready to go. Yep, got a question over here.
Jake Wilkins. I have a question about rural America, and I think rural can mean a bunch of different things. It could be living 45 minutes from a Walmart, or it could be living 2.5 hours from a Walmart, like where I'm from. I'm from Ainsworth. And I think one of the biggest things is getting people to move back to small communities, maybe because of housing reasons, or because maybe they can't find their wife a job that they've been trained for, because the guys on the panel up there, you probably know if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. So maybe you could go
Jake, you are very wise beyond your years.
Well, thank you.
No, absolutely. In fact, Courtney, maybe you could talk a little bit about the Economic Development Conference we have coming up this summer.
Yeah, the governor and I just announced his economic development conference. It'll be coming up on July 12th. One of the large issues that we're going to be talking about at that conference is housing, because it plays such a big role, especially in rural communities. It's something I dealt with very directly when I was working up in the Norfolk area. It's difficult for a community to grow, to attract new people in if you can't find a home to live in. It's impacting our employers directly, and so that's something we're talking to a number of different organizations. We're looking at model communities, ways that they have addressed this issue. We're looking at the programs that we have available to us at the state and federal level to see what we can do. it seems as though the market isn't really responding to the housing shortage in the rural areas. So how can we stimulate that growth so that we can build those communities back up?
Yeah, and I think that so there's not going to be, Jake, a silver bullet answer that gets us, how do we get our smaller communities to be able to grow? How do we get our young people like you to move back to their hometown? But I suspect that the things you're thinking about are the things that you want to see there, which really revolve around quality of life issues. You know, so we mentioned education earlier, but it's also access to health care. So making sure we support our critical access hospitals here in the state. Making sure we address the housing issue. Looking at other areas that we want to make sure we develop. You talked about making sure that, say, your spouse can get a job. Well, again, making sure that we have other industries that are growing as well. Agriculture is our #1 industry, but manufacturing is our second biggest industry. It makes up about 13% of our state economy. And manufacturing is something we can grow not just in Lincoln and Omaha, but all across our state. In fact, we've got great examples across our state on how to do that. So looking at, fostering the growth in those other industries, which again gets back to things like my infrastructure bank and investing in infrastructure, so that we can grow those other industries, so that if you are moving back for an ag job and then your spouse has the opportunity to take a job, say, as in a logistics or manufacturing or something along that lines, or frankly, even if you're talking about some of the great opportunities in technology that are going to be available both in agriculture and manufacturing, that's part of how we make sure we have those job opportunities. So that's why we're going to why we have conferences like this to focus on agriculture, but the Economic Development Summit, which will be the first annual Governor's Summit on Economic Development, will address a lot of these issues with regard to workforce and housing and some of these quality of life issues that also go into it. By creating those good paying jobs in our smaller communities, we'll be able to make sure that you have places to go eat and coffee shops and health care and things like that, because those good paying jobs will support all of that. So again, there's not going to be a silver bullet answer on anything we can do specifically, Jake, but if we can lay the foundation on all these things, and that's why we've got to make progress in all of it, we can help make sure that we've got that opportunity to be able to do just what you said. Make sure that there's the opportunity for you to move back to Ainsworth.
And I would just encourage each and every one of you to take an interest and get active in your communities, in your hometowns. A lot of time, the difference in whether or not a community is declining or whether or not it's growing is how interested the citizens of that community are in its future and creating that vision and banding together. I've seen a number of communities across the state that don't have any natural advantages over any other community, but they've really blossomed economically and they're doing very well and they're recruiting people back. And it all boils down to them having a vision and pulling together and working toward that. You can play such a key role. This is one of the reasons I came back to the state of Nebraska. Out on the East Coast, you can't get involved this directly. In the state of Nebraska, you can get intimately involved in your communities and you can actually make change happen and make a difference. I just encourage each and every one of you to do that. It would be welcomed in your communities.
I'd like to follow up on that a little bit with a specific example. You see the young people in the green shirts that are wandering around here that are part of the department's Ag Youth Institute. And a few years ago, we had a young man that was on the youth council that went home to his home community. And he's become very involved in that home community. I think he's on the city council there now. And he's brought that youthful perspective and that youthful excitement to his city, and his city would probably be one of the examples that Courtney is talking to about one that's engaged and involved. I think if you look at too many of our smaller towns across Nebraska, probably yesterday was the last day to file for candidacy, but in a lot of those city or town council races, if there were 3 openings, there's probably 3 candidates and they were incumbents. And so I think that, to bring that discussion to the table and also bring a youthful perspective to the table in many of our towns is what it's going to take to transform our town into the type of town that you as a young person want to come to and live in.
Just going to stand up and shout, I work with high school kids, I can do that.
Oh, we need it for the web stream. We need you to talk into the microphone for the web stream, so the folks online won't be able to hear you otherwise.
My name is Deb Eichhoff. I'm a teacher at Kearney High School, but I'm also a farm wife and a farm mother. My husband built our farm. His father was a school teacher. His mother was a waitress. I sat today and listened to all the amazing opportunities that these kids have to go into agriculture, and most of those openings as they go into that are probably twice to 3 times what my son will make this year as a part of our family farm. What are we doing to make sure that we still have those people who grow the corn, raise the cows, that want to stay on the family farm? Because it seems to me it all comes back to those people like my husband and my son who are willing to get up at 5 and come home at 11 and have lunch in the tractor, that type of thing. And I think that's something that we have to care for and nurture and make sure that those people continue to exist.
Yep, and that, again, that gets back to, one of the top priority for me in this session, which is property tax relief, because that's where we've seen it hit the most, is in our ag sector. I've talked about the taxes on ag land just over the last 5 years and how much that's gone up. So that's one of our priorities. But I think also it's, again, one of the reasons why we have conferences like this to share best practices. And I think, as Aaron was talking about, looking at how we can diversify the income for farm and ranch families. Also making sure, again, there's, again, not going to be a silver bullet answer that fixes all of our issues, but making sure that we're doing all the blocking and tackling, like opening up those trade doors, looking at value-added agriculture. Those are all ways that we can look to increase farm incomes. And, again, with corn, less than $3.50, it's not feeling very good right now. But again, that cycle will turn again as well, and that's where we've got to be prepared to be able to take advantage of it. Certainly, the work that you and your family are doing are the foundation of all the other jobs that are out there available. And if we lose that, then, that's going to be, the rest of it's probably not going to matter too much. Greg, what thoughts do you have?
I think the governor's exactly right. We need to try to figure out how we add value to our commodities so that instead of selling for 30 cents under the Board of Trade, we're selling even to the Board of Trade or over. So that'll create a lot of new wealth for our farmers and ranchers by developing that. And then looking at diversification opportunities for farms to be able to even out those highs and lows, if you're just strictly a row crop farmer or strictly a livestock farmer. But then I think it's also a recognition of quality of life too. And so, some people are driven by trying to find the highest paying job. Aaron talks about turning down jobs because he wants to live in a community and enjoy a certain quality of life. And so I think there's trade-offs there too that we need to make sure we preserve for our families that want to live in rural areas and have that quality of life that comes with a rural area of knowing that maybe you don't have to lock your door at night. You definitely don't lock your car up or pull the keys out of it. And most of our communities across Nebraska and some of those areas that have a value to them as well.
And that's, as I mentioned already, kind of just the diversification, breaking the mold of kind of what we're used to. Example, like I said, full-time, but 2 nights ago, my father-in-law and I, at 10 o'clock at night, I got a call. We had a calf needed a problem. I drove 35 miles, picked up colostrum from the vet clinic, drove back, we're nursing a calf. Next morning, I was back on a conference call at 6 o'clock for my full-time job. So it's not really for the faint of heart.
Yo, you're really selling that, Aaron. Good job.
But you will be rewarded handsomely, believe me. The lifestyle that we can live, it's awesome. It's awesome to raise a family in. I would have never done it any other way. And so I just really, really encourage everyone that the opportunities are there. But we gotta look a little different than what we currently see in our former model. There are a ton of opportunities, and not only just turning down jobs, there's tremendous wealth to be made in the industry here in Nebraska. You just got to be creative and be willing to work for it.
Okay, so I've been told we've got time for one more question, and again, I'd just encourage y'all. You got Aaron here, who's probably closest in age to you. Maybe Courtney's giving him a run there, but you got 2 people on the end who are probably closer to your age than certainly I am. But you could ask them directly about how they got their start in agriculture, or their careers, and things like that, or specific questions about that. So we got time for one more. Or we're going to take it from the web.
Yes.
Twitter, I should say? Okay.
Yes. One for all of you. What is the biggest area of opportunity that you see in Nebraska agriculture for us as students?
Well, I'm going to let Greg is probably a better expert on this than I am, but I'm going to, just based upon my observations, and Aaron, you touched upon this a little bit, technology is going to change every industry. It already has. It certainly changed my industry. I came from the securities industry. There's a tremendous opportunity for technology to change. It's changing agriculture and continue to change. You know, you mentioned the drones. That's going to be a huge area. I know that talking to one gentleman who got his son to move back to the family farm and then is competing with him because he can get a job helping get people getting their software set up on their systems that they're buying for their production agricultural operations. So I think there's technology really is going to be a huge opportunity, and you all are going to be much more familiar with what the technology is going to be than somebody like me. You know, I'm 51 years old, and I'm not as facile with the technology as my 16-year-olds are. So, you know, that is something that I think is a huge opportunity for you, is looking for those ways that technology is going to change agriculture, and that's, getting back to Aaron's place, that's also where the areas to make money is going to be.
And so mine's right on the same lines of the governor's answer. It's that the what's next in agriculture. You know, we heard about, you know, raising algae and insects. You know, that's a what's next in agriculture. That's something that may be able to complement our traditional corn and cattle operations. So I think that's important. I think also the shift from petroleum-based to bio-based, and the demand that society has on renewable, sustainable sources of everything in their house, whether it's the plastic bags or the toilet cleaner.
Yeah, and just if I could just highlight on that, because this actually combines both those. We're talking to a company that claims to have a technology. It's actually a Chinese company that is looking at Nebraska, but they claim to have a technology that allows them to take corn and really turn it into a fiber that is superior to nylon. So that gets your point. You know, it's a technology implication, it's a new industry, and something that would create tremendous demand for our commodities here, as well as creating value-added agriculture and opportunities for manufacturing right here in our state. I mean, that's, you know, that kind of change is going to be huge. Aaron, or? No, the person from Twitter said all of us, Aaron. You can't get out of it.
One other thing that I know we don't do a ton of, we've tried it here in Nebraska in the past, and I've seen it in some other states, and actually have colleagues that are doing it, and this is another one thing outside the mold, is aquaculture. I have partners that I work with in other states that are actually putting up facilities that look like finishing facilities that we'd use for birds and pigs, but they're actually raising fish in them. So there's lots of opportunities even that. So like I said, just continue to think outside the box. No, stay in the mold. You got to be continually thinking, and there'll be new opportunities that are there. But also, like the governor mentioned with technology, right now there's a lot of co-ops, there's a lot of private industry that are working on the ag guidance, the prescription, the surveying of fields and how we're going to use that data for precision application. Tractors driving themselves. Even if you're back on your own family farm, it's an opportunity. I know we've looked at it is so we could hire somebody to come and do it, or instead of spending that amount of money, if it's something to save wealth back on our own family farm, maybe we could learn how to do it ourselves. And so that's some areas where maybe even to help our own income on farm, that's where he's, and also to continue to further educate our own selves too.
I'd say, you know, echoing some of the comments you heard, there's so many opportunities for innovation and advancement in agriculture. Technology is one of those pieces. I can't get over how much the yields have increased from the time that I was farming a number of years ago. I'm not going to tell you how old I am. But the yields have just increased exponentially. And so there are so many ways for you all to get involved in moving agriculture to the next level and in making it more efficient, which will also help when commodity prices are down.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time then to take any more questions, but I just want to wrap up and say thank you again for everybody for being here today and for taking a look at careers in agriculture. It is vital for our state because this is our #1 industry in the state, and we need you. And so look at this because we want you to stay here in Nebraska. We want you to raise your families here in Nebraska, and there are tremendous opportunities. And I just want to hit upon something else that Courtney said earlier. It gets back to leadership. When you're talking about the communities that are doing well, it's because of leadership. It's the kind of involvement that Courtney was describing, and you all have that same opportunity to be able to get involved. It may seem intimidating, but it is, if you get to know the people in your community and what they're doing, you can be a part of making that solution happen. And that's one of the things I just want to, I think that, Courtney said that I think is just vitally important, that you all can be a part of making sure your community is one of those ones that blossoms. So it looks like I'm turning it back over to Morgan and Landon.
Sure. Let's give the governor and the panel of speakers a big round of applause.